question to get everyone started, but thinking before we begin, is if there was one accent that you could do perfectly, what accent would it be? If you could go to a dialect coach and say, teach me this, which one would it be? My answer is British, because I think I can do a British accent, and I know I can't. So I was saying, yeah, I can do it, and then I try, and it's just a mess.
You could. You totally could.
If you coached me, I bet I could.
I absolutely know you would.
Scottish accent. Scottish accent is fun. Scottish, Irish, I always confuse.
Oh yeah, easy to do. I had never seen the show Outlander before, and Lin-Manuel Miranda had made a reference to it when he was in England filming another show. He showed a picture of his wife pressing against a stone and then mentioned something about trying to find Jamie or something, and I was like, what is he referring to? So I flipped on Outlander at the start of quarantine, and I was totally hooked all the way through. I mean, what a good show. Loved it.
I heard someone once say that the way my sister, it's my sister, she can do lots of accents, but to get started, she has to say the name of the place.
Ooh.
And that's, so she can do I can't do it. She's like Scottish, and then go into a Scottish accent, and be like Boston, and then she can go into the full Boston accent.
Very cool. So that's her keyword, that's her trigger word.
And she's a comedian, so she can do all those accents and do them well.
That's awesome. Good for her. Have you noticed a Dallas accent? Because you don't have a Southern accent. But
not really. Yeah. I think there are certain words where the Southern comes out. Like Dallas. The A goes a little bit, and the state fair. Little phrases and things like that.
It's fascinating to go to visit my cousins in Austin and to hear the levels of sort of Texas identity, right, that comes through. That there's a sort of holding on to, or really wrongly wanting to identify with Texas and a Texas accent that comes
All right, so we'll give it one more minute before we officially begin. If folks want to grab some water or do a quick stretch before we start, and then we will dive right in with learning the lingo. I'm excited about.
Hi, Lisa Mallet.
I would love to master a British accent.
How are you, Lisa? She's muted. You're muted.
Lisa Millette, she's the Executive Artistic Director at City Lights.
Sorry, I was saying thank you so much for doing this.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. Are you kidding me? I'm so excited.
It's so nice to see you too.
Good to see you. I miss you guys so much.
Oh man.
Don't you miss our people?
Oh, I mean, my heart just aches, and then I see the little square with the beautiful face, and I'm like, oh, my people.
Oh man.
I'm making plum jam while I listen from my tree.
Impressive.
Because the Mother Nature chooses when I do it. If I don't move on it, then the fruit dies. So I'm gonna just chop up plums with my hands and listen to you teach us things.
Awesome. Well, I hope it is edifying.
I'll save you some. It's really good.
Oh, look forward to it. Thank you.
Low sugar too.
Ah, okay, cool. Background.
Oh yeah, Olivia.
Oh. Hello, Olivia.
Hi. All right, we'll be quiet now so you can start.
All right, we will officially begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Next Stage, City Lights Friday night program. If you are a regular of the Next Stage, you'll notice that I am not Marketing Director Rebecca Wallace, who typically hosts the show. I am Carol Albin, the marketing and executive assistant at City Lights, so I'm still in the family. I asked to guest host this episode because selfishly I wanted to be the one to talk to Kim. Last year I met Kimberly Mohne Hil. We think is right around this time during City Lights production of The Wolves, which Kimberly directed and I acted in. So as soon as we got her on the show, I called dibs. So you gotta talk to me. In addition to being a wonderful director, which I can attest to, Kimberly Mohne Hil is an actor, a professor at Santa Clara University, but mostly is widely known for being a voice and dialect coach. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So we'll talk about general dialect coaching and things like that, and then we'll go into specifics of 3 shows that she has worked on. We're going to talk about the musical version of Pride and Prejudice, which was at TheaterWorks in 2019, which is now on Amazon Prime, Cabaret at SF Playhouse in 2019, and Language Archives at City Lights in 2014. And before we talk about each of those shows, I will share my screen and show a trailer and a slideshow to get us all in the zone of the show beforehand. And then after all of that, we'll have time for an audience Q&A, and maybe we'll be led in a few vocal exercises or learn a few tricks and tips and things like that. So let's just get started. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
So to begin, how did you get into dialect coaching?
I got into it when I was at UC San Diego, was where I started my training as an actor in undergrad. And my very first teacher was Susan Lee, who was the dialect coach at the La Jolla Playhouse. And she was my first acting teacher, and she was the dialect coach. So I don't, when you first go to college and you're studying the thing you've been passionate about your whole life, acting, and you have your very first acting teacher, you just become absolutely enamored with absolutely everything they have to share with you. And she shared dialect with me. In every project that I was in, it was a dialect project, and I got to sort of tag along with her when she was coaching at the La Jolla Playhouse. It was my first teacher of IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. So, and I was good at it. So it was something, it's one of those things where you don't even know that you like it because you've never been introduced to it before. And so going to college and learning that original sort of lesson with that original teacher ignited a passion for it right from the get-go. And then, like everything, when you're good at something, people encourage you along in that thing. And if you like it and you're good at it, then the doors continue to open, and it just went from there.
So what are some of your favorite dialects and accents?
British, obviously standard British, London British. One of the things that we're doing, we're rewatching all of the Downton Abbeys. So we started from season 1, we're back to that, and watching those from the get-go. So listening to all the little regional versions of the British accent. I like the Irish accents, the ones that I've had to coach and the ones that I've done in performance. Accents have personalities, so I like the personalities of certain accents more than others, but they also have an effect on people too. So there's an interesting psychological effect, for example, and I was talking about this in my workshop that I did at Voice Tracks with my students there. I used to work at the San Jose Mercury News in customer service, and when people missed their newspaper in the morning or it didn't get delivered, they'd call customer service and they would complain. And if we had a particularly angry person, they would call, the person talking to them would call me over as the sort of manager to talk to this very, very angry person. And I would know that they were angry, and I would start to speak to them in a Southern accent instead of my regular accent. And it calmed them down immediately. As soon as I started to use a Southern genteel sound, it had this psychological effect on them. So accents like that have, an effect on an audience or on a listener, I like those. So a Southern accent for those reasons, or a New York or Brooklyn accent for, the reasons of authority and toughness, or, aggressiveness, or whatever it is that people equate with that accent.
So are some accents more difficult than others, or do you think that just depends on the person?
I personally think they're more difficult. So I have a hard time, for example, with a Louisiana Cajun accent. That's a really tricky one, or a New Orleans Cajun accent, because it can merge into so many other sounds that we know. So it's very tricky. You said Scottish earlier. That one's a tricky one. That one does sound a lot like Irish in a way. It has that same placement, and it has some of the same treatments of inflection and prosody in the dialect. But so that one I have a hard time with in terms of really isolating the guttural nature of it and not making it go to a stereotype. That one's tricky for me. So yeah.
So do you ever find yourself, other than when you have to, like, slipping into an accent or slipping into a dialect just in everyday life?
All the time. I don't think my girls have ever gone a day without hearing me do a different voice at different random and sundry times. Literally, I think when their friends get driven around by me, within a car ride, I've used more than one voice, and it trips them out. It trips their friends out. They're just like, what are you doing? So yeah, I'm the weird, stereotypical theater person who doesn't really have her own voice, but voices a whole bunch of other people's voices.
So if someone wanted to learn an accent or get into dialect, what's the best way for them, or at the base, to begin?
Listening and repetition. So people asked how I got good at it, or how it became something that was a gift. And I never really had thought about it before, being asked that question over and over again. And I would give the same story that I gave you. I started in college, I learned it in college. And the deeper question is, but how did you get good at it? Like, how did you know something you were good at? And my mom is deaf. She had hearing until she was 1 year old, and then she got pneumonia and it took away her hearing. So she taught herself to speak, and she wore these really large hearing aids because it was the 60s or 50s. And she read lips. She never learned sign language. She didn't want to identify as deaf, or her parents didn't want her to identify as deaf. I don't know what the story is behind that, but she got about 60% of her hearing back with the hearing aids, and then the rest she used lip reading to know what people were saying. And one of the things, as her daughter growing up, she would never say what. If she didn't hear you or didn't understand what you said, she wouldn't say what, because that would be too vulnerable. So instead, she would just look at me when someone had said something that she didn't understand, and she'd look at me, and I would repeat what they said to her with clarity and articulation, just as a little girl, like growing up. So my 10,000 hours of mastery happened when I was a child, being my mom's ears. So the first thing you do when you're learning a dialect is you listen, and you listen very closely, and you listen with the intent of trying to replicate it. Not just the initial listening of, ooh, I like the way you sound, or ooh, I like that voice, or oh, I like how you say that word, but like a really critical thinking, listening, and repetition to the point of feeling it, the muscle pattern happening different in your mouth in order to do that new sound.
I like that. So we're going to dive into our first show that we're going to talk about tonight, which is Pride and Prejudice. And I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to watch the trailer of that show. We can all get in the zone. Good.
And I must find the will to resist her. I must find the strength to walk away. It's what I have to do, but thoughts will always lead me to you. I like your eyes, and damn it, it's alarming. I don't want to love her, I have obligations. But here I am, in bitter disappointment at my own behavior. So just let me say, Miss Bennett, I will lock away what's in my heart, for you will never
All right. I love that trailer.
Yeah, it was a beautiful show. It was really fun.
So it is the world premiere musical of Pride and Prejudice at TheaterWorks. It is now available on Amazon Prime. If you're a Prime member, you can go ahead and watch it. And so Pride and Prejudice, it's Regency era in Great Britain. So how do you approach that? I feel like we've been talking about British accents and people think they know British accents and not quite. What was the process behind that show?
We went to, you know, the RP, the classic RP, not the sort of modified RP that you started to hear nowadays. But we went back.
When you say RP, what does that mean?
I'm sorry, received pronunciation, and that's a term that was coined, I want to say, in the early 1900s by a linguist, and I want to say Daniel Jones maybe gave it that name. I could be wrong on that one. But it was the language of the sort of aristocracy, the language that was taught at private schools, which they call public schools there, but it's different. And it was a dialect that was historically, or in certain sort of stories about where that term and where that dialect came to be. The stories I've heard include the aristocratic families of the regions of Great Britain had their own sounds until they sent their children to Eton or to Harrow with the king's kids and started to intermingle with the king's, offspring, and they sounded different. And so in order to blend in and to fit with the highest class in the aristocracy, they needed to all sound the same. And so they were given a dialect in their classes, in their schools, that was a standardized version of the most posh version of English. And then that way, all of the aristocratic families could sound the same, and they wouldn't be defined by region. And so the dialect and the study of dialect in that area became very classist and sort of stratified. And the received pronunciation, there's again a sort of apocryphal things about how that term came to be. It's the dialect of English that was received by the king's children from God, and that's why you have to learn it. It's also been known as BBC English. It has then, and that's because most of the speakers spoke in that dialect, and then it's sort of controversially called a standard English. Controversial because who's to say what standard? Why does your dialect get to win an idea of standardized? So there's a lot of political and social reasons not to call it a standard English. So yeah, RP. And so we started there. And what's cool about RP is the Oxford English Dictionary and the Daniel Jones Pronouncing Dictionary, which has been around since the early 1900s. And so there's a pronouncing dictionary that has all of these British words and how it was pronounced. And it has evolved. There's about 20 different editions of the English Pronouncing Dictionary. So as you go back, if you can find the old versions of it, it will give you what that word was pronounced like back in those days. And then from there, you can even look at poetry like Ben Crystal does and David Crystal does when they look at original pronunciation of Shakespeare. They look at poetry, they look at hymns of the time and see what words used to rhyme when they were written, and you can gauge at that time how those sounds used to sound.
So when you're dialect coaching a musical,
Yeah.
Does that change anything? Does that affect how you do it?
A little bit, because you have to go in conjunction with the music director. And so there were moments where we had to say that, because also singing, the accent doesn't necessarily carry through. You could hear it a little bit in that guy, because in that clip of the song, there were specific sounds that he was focusing on doing that you could hear come across. But in general, when you're singing, your British accent doesn't show through, because it's an extended vowel sequence, and the vowel in music gets extended and it takes away the dialect of the vowel. So yeah, if the music director wanted a specific rhyme or a specific dialect choice to happen in a song where normally it wouldn't because dialect gets sort of watered down in music, that was his choice. We had to, I mean, I could give them the sound. This is what it would sound like if you're speaking this word. And then he would say, yeah, that sounds too ridiculous. We're gonna, okay, good. Don't do it then. Or I want them to do this because it helps also with their breath or their singing or, so yeah, it was a collaboration.
So when it comes to the British accent, the Regency one that you were just talking about, is there a certain word or phrase that sticks out to you that people always get this one wrong, or this one's more difficult, or something like that?
Yeah, it's the same one for any British accent, and that's the overcorrection for the short ah sound. In a British dialect, there's a very specific list of words. The lexical set that John Wells created, he calls it the trap bath set. There's the ah sound as in the word trap, and then there's the ah sound in English as in the word bath. But in America, it's all trap. Trap and bath sound exactly the same in America, but in England, it's trap and it's bath. And there's a very specific list of words for the bath lexical set. It's not every short ah word. And so one of the biggest mistakes that American actors make when they're learning a British dialect is they overdo the trap bath sound change. And they put the bath sound change on words that are in the trap lexical set, and they overdo it. So I'll hear things like, you know, and I use this when I'm giving my presentation, can I have an apple? People will say, can I have an apple? No, you can't. Can't is the only word in that entire sentence that should have the R sound as in bath. Everything else should stay trap. Everything else should stay ah. Can I have an apple? No, you can't. And so when people overcorrect and go towards that R sound, it drives me absolutely insane.
Good to know. No, not to do that now.
You say that now, but it might slip in.
That's true. That's true.
Very, very common. It's very common, and it's a dead giveaway.
Do you have any other comments on Pride and Prejudice, Kim, before we move on to Cabaret?
As a dialect coach, I very rarely get to do a show that gets sort of recorded and played out to such a wide audience that when they streamed it the first time, it had an audience of 160,000 people. So it was a standard coaching job for me. I do British dialect at least 4 times a year every year for shows or companies. So it was nothing new in my world, but the effect of that particular show being on that world premiere and with those actors and having the reach that it has was really phenomenal and really a gift. It was really exciting.
And like I said earlier, it is on Amazon Prime, free to watch if you're a Prime member. I thought I was watching the trailer earlier today, and I pressed play on the movie and watched 20 minutes before I realized it wasn't the trailer and I was just watching it.
Excellent.
It's good. I highly recommend it. So now let's move forward a little bit in time.
Oh gosh, are you going to play Cabaret?
I am going to play the Cabaret trailer from...
After you're done with it. I have feelings.
This is from the SF Playhouse version in 2019. I'm going to share my screen again. If I can find the right trailer. Oh, no, not yet. Silly Zoom. Sorry, folks. Give me 1 second. Zoom does not like the program I have the trailer on, so I'm just going to open it in another one really quick. All right, that was Cabaret at SF Playhouse, and that trailer was made by SF Playhouse, and the first trailer was TheaterWorks. I did not make either of those trailers, making sure folks know that. So, Cabaret.
Yeah.
German accents.
Oh, the trailer, first of all, the part that bothers me is the little boy singing at the beginning, because I was telling Carol earlier that when the trailer was made, I had never met that little kid. I've never coached him. I've never had a session with him. When I heard the trailer for the first time, it had already been published on their website. So if I had had my druthers, I would have nuanced his accent a little bit more. I think he was just given the packet that I gave everybody at the first rehearsal and told to do those sound changes. And there's a lot more to it than just doing sound changes. So that bothers me a little bit, but you know, what are you gonna do?
But it's interesting that you notice that it's not as nuanced as it should be.
Oh, it's like nails on a chalkboard, right?
So how do you a German accent?
So what about it? What'd you say? I'm sorry.
Just a German accent, 1930s German. So it's it.
The cool part about 1930s German is we have actual audio. You know, evidence, and we can hear it to imitate it and to describe it and transcribe it. And then with the German accent, the thing about the German accent, and this is something that we have to do, and I've coached Cabaret now, I think 4 or 5 times. It's one of the shows that I have repeatedly coached over and over again. And if I never have to coach it again, I'll be okay with that. But it's the German accent. Usually when you get a packet of sound changes for a dialect, for the most part, and this is true with the British dialect and an Irish dialect and a Scottish dialect, you'll have a lot of vowel changes on there. You'll see this is how we say it in America, and this is how they say it in this region of blah, blah, blah. For the German dialect, it's the exact, and then there will be maybe 1 or 2 consonants that you have to change. The German dialect, the exact opposite. It's a bunch of consonants that have to change and only a couple of vowels that have to change. And when you change consonants, because consonants are done by articulators and articulation is so important on stage, you run the risk of making yourself inarticulate or you can't understand them. Unintelligible from the audience perspective. So German is one of those accents that when I was first acting, one of my first professional gigs, I had to play Hitler and Eva Braun, you know, a classic combination of characters for me. And I was doing my, you know, thick German accent, and my director at one point goes, you know, you're going to have to rein that in. You're going to have to not do it so strongly. And I was so offended. I literally cried. I was like, I'm a dialect coach. People know me about dialect. And if I don't do you know, and I was so offended that I had to water it down. But his point was, I don't understand it. Our ears as American audiences are not trained to hear a German dialect in its full, thick, authentic way. We'd have to have subtitles. And even some British accents, if we were to do some regions of Britain, we might need subtitles if we do it really strongly and clearly and authentically. So part of the challenge with the German dialect in Cabaret or any show is how much do you do? How strong do you make it? And it ends up sounding a bit more, and this is a director's way of describing it, it ends up sounding a bit more, you know, continental European or whatever. And it's sort of a watered down German accent, but it's challenging. It's challenging to keep it intelligible.
Well, how much of a difference is there between 1930s German and let's say 2020 German?
Oh, a ton. I mean, there's a strength. There's the things that create a dialect or that create a strength in the dialect are things like education, access to media, access to other people, travel, expanding your circle, right? And so in places where you stay relatively constrained in your own inner circle of people, your dialect is going to be thicker because you're going to want to identify with that circle of people. And so you will adapt and adopt your sound to match and mirror theirs. As your circle expands, as your world expands, you start to adapt and adopt to every other circle that you encounter as you go along. So your dialect gets more and more universal. And so the German dialect of the 2020s, it depends, honestly. You know, is it a German from Berlin who's been educated and speaks 7 languages and has traveled to America? Then that's going to sound differently than a German from 1929 who's never left Berlin and wants to very clearly identify with the Nazi party. It's a different sound.
Cabaret has a few different accents.
Yeah.
There's
British.
mostly German, but some British. There's an American accent.
Yeah.
What was it like having in that 1930s all those different places?
It was the same sort of idea of, you know, which accent are we doing from Britain? And we were doing BBC basically, because that was sort of the height of it, the height of that BBC accent. And then again, character choices make all the difference. If you're going to do an accent, you cannot just say, okay, I have to, like, I couldn't just do my German accent because it was this. I had to adapt to character circumstances, delivery of lines, the song, the other person. So there are things that would affect the accent, no matter how authentic it is. At some point, character has to rule. So yeah, we did the BBC RP. The American accent was the American accent. The lines sort of delineate the formality of it based on what you get to say. And then the German accent was a fairly strong German accent for the time. And certain people, the older characters, had a more ingrained, entrenched German accent than the younger ones. The what's his name? The bad guy who's the Nazi. I've coached it 4 times and I've just sort of wiped his name out of my head. But yeah, his accent was a bit more continental, a bit more worldly than the 2 older characters.
So you say Cabaret, you could never direct again and be happy.
I could go without coaching it again, yes. And honestly, I really loved. Did you guys do it at the same time? I think City Lights did it at the same time, and I didn't see the City Lights version because I was really focused on the one at SF Playhouse, and honestly, no anything to anybody else who's ever done it. I don't think I've seen a more definitive production than the one that I coached at SF Playhouse. It was incredible, and it was raunchy in a way that I'd never seen before. And I had my 2 girls in the front row watching it. And I was like, oh, geez, I'm going to have a conversation now about what that was they just saw. So it had all of that sort of hedonism. But the girl who played Sally, she was incredible. So yeah, I would love to keep that one as my last one.
So what's a show you do want a dialect coach for?
Wow. Golly, I don't know. There are new shows getting written all the time. So I was working on 2 when we got shut down. I was working on Ragtime for the 2nd time at TheaterWorks, and I love that show. I did the original production when they did it. I coached with Kelly on that one, and I was coming back to do it again. I love that show. So I want to do that one. And then The Book of Will by Lauren Gunderson, I was slated to do that one. that one was going to be cool, and I was going to hopefully throw in a little OP, right? A little original pronunciation of Shakespeare into that one. So yeah, that was a bummer.
So, anything else about cabaret you want to speak on before we move on?
What was interesting about this version of cabaret is there were actors in it, and this might happen. I mean, I think you guys, Lisa can speak to this, I'm sure, but the idea when you're directing a show, or especially a musical, when you have an actor who has been directed badly in the past, and so now they have some scars on their psyche about something. Usually it's related to singing. They're usually like, I can't sing, or there's a confidence issue around that. But there's always these scars that some really horrible directors can leave on people. And there was an actress in the show who had been really scarred by a previous dialect coach, and she was terrified about doing the dialect, and the dialect was incredibly important to her role. And so it was more than just giving her sound changes and vocal work. It was also confidence building and supporting and guiding her back into finding her ability with the dialect. That was really profound for me on that experience. I really enjoyed seeing the growth and the confidence and the peace that she came to at the end of our time together, with a hope that that sort of eliminates the old bad voices that she had running around in her head, hopefully. I don't know. But she did it, and she did a great job.
So I just realized I've been using the terms accent and dialect pretty interchangeably. I'm sure I'm wrong with that.
It's you know, we do that in theater, right? We don't get pedantic about it, but the accent is a language that you speak with the flair of, and dialect is the way that language is spoken in a specific region, including all of its colloquialisms and phrases around it. So it's like the language and everything else about it, the prosody, the music, the specific colloquial phrases that exist in that region. That's the dialect of that language. But we use it interchangeably. There's no reason to get hardcore about it unless you're in a linguistics class, I think.
All right, so now I'm going to show, and this is a slideshow that Rebecca Wallace made for the music episode with George for the last stage, and it's language archive slideshow of some of the shows and the music that was in the show. So we can get ready for that one. Oh, no, don't play yet. Sorry again, folks. My Zoom is not wanting to play this. But I will make it. For sake of time, we're just going to skip this one.
Okay.
Sorry, everybody. I don't know why Zoom is deciding to not share my screen with this. I want to get into this one because I was excited about Language Archive. So we're just going to jump into Language Archive. Sorry about that, folks.
Awesome.
Language Archive at City Lights in 2014. So in the Language Archive, characters speak a fictional language. How do you dialect coach a language that doesn't exist?
That's a great question. That's a great question, and especially one that didn't have any kind of base to go off of. I think I've coached a show, I coached a show at Berkeley called The House That Will Not Stand. That was a very specific French, New Orleans, free woman of color, 1860s accent, right? Which, what? But there's like a historical rabbit hole you can go down and find samples that could slowly start to build what it might have sounded like, in the same way that you figure out how OP is, you know, original pronunciation. But with a dialect that doesn't exist at all in any circumstance, that's a collaboration. That's what does the director think that that's supposed to sound like? What is the playwright describing it as? Is it Esperanto? Is it, you know, a version of a language that is meant to be universal and so therefore contains sounds from every single dialect that exists in the world? And then you put that together and create a packet of options for the director, and then together you guys decide what that's going to sound like. It's like a lot of acting choices, right? You base it off of an inspiration. And so it might have been inspired by, and you and I talked before, this was 6 years ago or more. I didn't look at my notes. I have no idea what we ended up choosing for that particular show. But I know that the process was collaborative and inspired by, as opposed to mirroring anything that was actually already in existence.
So if you could create your own dialect, the Kimberly Mohne Hil dialect, what do you think it would sound like? Where would it take inspiration from?
British. It would take inspiration from British and Irish and Scottish, I'm watching, and Northern Irish. And it would take inspiration from all the shows I'm watching. Again, my poor kids, I don't think they've ever had a day where I didn't do something like that. It's usually British. I discovered early on in my parenting that when, especially when they were toddlers, when they were not able to like get things done, like I need you to do this right now, rather than losing my temper and blowing my gasket, I would just start speaking in a funny voice and be like, all right, you little wee ones. And it's just like start to get them moving in a way that allowed me to laugh at my own self. So yeah, it would take inspiration from all those things.
So you mentioned Esperanto. What is that?
Esperanto is short-lived. I mean, I think it still lives somewhere, but there was a real push back in the 80s for this this universal language, that it was going to be its own language. It was going to draw on a Latin base and you know, have influences from is it still on Duolingo? Yeah. So it was meant to take over the world and be the world's universal language, and be apolitical and a-classist, so it wouldn't relate to any class or any, you know, status or anything. And it was meant to unify the world. And yeah, no, that didn't happen.
It didn't stick?
So it's this very obscure, you've got to know it kind of, you know, I'm seeing yeah, there are still clubs and groups, right? So it's a very obscure thing. It does sound a little Spanish to me when I listen to some of it, but then there's like a German sound will creep in there, or yeah, it's fascinating. But yeah, a very short-lived or to a very specific audience language from the 80s, I think.
So Language Archive is all about this character who studies language. How do you approach studying language as a whole?
Well, for me as a dialect coach, it's not just a study of the language the same way that it would be for a linguist who's studying it for their, you know, when I study it, it's for the telling of a story through a character and a character's perspective. So when I'm listening to a dialect for a play, I'm looking at the world of the play, the time period of the play, the circumstances of the play, the circumstances of the characters. Is this a character who has had this kind of life? Is this a character who's had this kind of life? And then I listen to the sounds and the music and the word choices of people that resemble those classifications that exist in the play. And then from there, I create a dialect map, essentially. But I love listening to the way that people sound, or the way that our identity comes out of our bodies through our mouths in our sounds that we've brought along with us through our entire history. I love that we all have our own dialect, and we all have our own reasons for sounding the way that we sound.
So this was one of the questions in the chat that kind of relates to this. But how would you describe or define your own accent?
So that's I would define it as it's an affected, it speaks of the artifice of me, honestly, if I have to say something profoundly vulnerable, that I think there's an artifice to me personally, Kimberly, that I project forward, both for myself and for others. That there's probably a true sound that if I were to get to it, it would sound a little bit like my childhood, and that is something I don't want to carry with me. I didn't like my childhood. I didn't like what happened to me as a child. So there's a part of me consciously adapting my sound to rid myself of those experiences, memories, conditions. In order to do that, I had to study, I had to listen to others, and to adopt the sounds around me that I found appealing. And then my profession requires me to put on another layer of speech. And so those sounds come from that as well. So it's a constantly changing. So my sound is constantly changing, but I'm a San Jose native. And if I could live my entire day speaking in a British accent, I would, but it would look weird because I'm from San Jose.
So before we segue completely into audience Q&A, I started to a little bit. Any final language archive thoughts?
It was, that's one of those fun ones, because nobody's going to be sitting in the audience going, that's not how that sounds. You know what I mean? Like, no one's going to call you on all of my other shows. There's going to be someone in the audience who goes, they nailed it, or they didn't nail it, or two people from the exact same region of Ireland listening to my show that's Irish going, that was dead on. And then someone else going, that sounded awful. It's nothing like it at all. It's okay.
It's fun to have that freedom.
Yeah, language archives there was nobody that could do that.
All right, so on that note, we will open it up to audience Q&A, and if folks want to turn their cameras on and say hi.
Hey.
Love to see some faces.
Awesome.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. If you want to raise your hand, I can call on you. Hello, everybody. Hello, Meryl and Rebecca Wallace. Fancy seeing you at the next stage. Hello, everyone. So here's a question from Meryl. How do you coach dialects with which you are not familiar?
Great question. I listen to them. I try to find as many samples as I can. It's a lot easier now with the internet. Back in the early days of my career, we didn't have the internet, or it wasn't as, prevalent. That tells you how old I am, unfortunately. But the earlier days, I'd have to actually call real people and interview them over the phone and transcribe what I was hearing, and collect my dramaturgy about the region or about, the people, through actual oral interviews. Nowadays, we can just Google search it, and there are so many. There was there has been, and for a long time, but early on in the 2000s, mid 2010, a real push for oral narratives, because I think the greatest generation was starting to die out. And so those histories, those stories of an incredibly cataclysmic time in our American history, were the first person accounts of it were dying out. And so there was a real push to get those voices on tape, on record. And so there are specific oral narrative collections out there on the internet. You can find one for anything. And those are those are just gold for dialect coaches. You listen to these native speakers of an accent and you can write down what you're hearing. You don't have to know IPA. I just spent 2 weekends teaching workshops for actors at Voice Tracks where you don't have to know the symbols that go along with the sounds. You can just write out what you hear. How would you write that? What letters would you write down that make that sound in your own mind? And when did you hear it? When do you hear that sound happening? So I do that.
Thank you.
A question from Rebecca Wallace. Have you coached someone who is not an American using to do an American accent?
Yes.
How do you do that?
Yeah, that's tricky. And I usually, if they're an actor, this is a weighted question for me. If they're an actor, and they can adopt pretty well. The acting muscle of discipline, imitation, homework, drill, work on it, listen to it over and over and over again, take the note. That is so much ingrained in us as actors. And generally speaking, I've coached actors, for example, who've had an East Asian accent, but then they had to speak like in a Chicago accent, or they had to speak in a New York accent. And they were able to switch over and do that because of the discipline of acting. That particular question gets me though, because in my field, I have a skill that business people think transfers to their employees who speak with an accent that they want to sound more American. And so they hire me to help eliminate accents. And I hate that phrase because, again, our accent that's who we are. And so to eliminate it feels sort of, feels awful to me. It's like taking the soul of a person away. However, clarity of utterance in a business professional field is very important. I have found when I'm coaching people into an American accent, I call it accent acquisition. I don't call it accent removal. I call it accent acquisition. They are acquiring an American accent if they want it. And the difference is they're not usually as quick to achieve it as an actor is. An actor is used to messing around with the muscle memory in their mouth. They're used to playing with voices and sounding weird and allowing that vulnerability to equal growth over a period of time. And regular people, it's much more weighted psychologically. It's much more weighted professionally for them. And the pressure is a lot different. And the work ethic is different. And they're not used to doing the play version of their sounds in the same way that actors are. So I've coached them. I just finished coaching someone. I don't like doing it because it's not as profound a difference as they would like to hope. It's like a transaction to business owners when they want their employees to sound differently. It's a transaction, and I don't like that. That's not why I got into this field. So occasionally I'll do it because the person really, really wants to and really promises they're going to work hard, and they're very, and it has worked in some cases, but in others it's not as dramatic a difference as they hope it was going to be.
There's a comment in the chat from Lisa saying she appreciates how you described why we don't hear dialects when folks are singing. She's thinking about Adele, whose accent is so thick, but not so much in her songs.
Yeah, it's true. It's all of them. I use Adele when I'm teaching Cockney. I love her sound. She's so wonderful. You like my ooh. She's like a new ooh. And she's awesome. Yeah, but yeah, it doesn't. The sustaining of vowel sounds takes away your dialect.
Here's a question from Janine Evans. Have you ever worked with American natives, possibly on oral narratives, which you just spoke about?
Native American, I have not. I have listened to some oral narratives, but I've not worked with any. I think I had to coach a Native American accent in a show a long time ago at the Young Conservatory at ACT. But it was only a couple of lines and really tricky. And yeah, no, nothing recently, nothing. Really.
Beverly says she's from the Boston area. So when she consciously tries to say the letter R, she has to revert back to park the car.
Back to car. Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's one of the, I mean, you had told me to come up with an exercise or whatever for people, and the you know, I'm sometimes asked to teach people an accent as a post-show activity or something in a quick little thing. And so I've narrowed down like a British dialect to, you know, RP in a minute, or, you know, Irish in a minute. And what would I do? How would you think about it? And the first thing you are supposed to ask yourself with every dialect, or at least I encourage people to ask themselves, is the question of R. What does that region do with their R sound? An R that's at the beginning of a word, or an R that's at the end of a word, or an R that's in front of a consonant, right? What does that particular region do? Because that is the sound. When I listen to speakers who've been in America for the longest period of time, you know, I had a colleague at ACT who had been here since the 30s from Germany, had a completely American accent except a German sounding R. My British friends, obviously, they're going to keep their version of English because it's English, damn it. It's not American. But they'll keep their, you know, version of their dialect. But the R is the trickiest one. So it makes perfect sense that you have to consciously work on that for Boston. Question of R.
So you teased it a little bit, but I did ask if Kim could lead us all in a quick exercise or dialect thing. And selfishly, I want to do it.
Okay.
So what are you going to teach us today?
Let's go ahead and do British. You said that's the one you wanted, right?
Yeah.
You
Let's do it.
Okay.
If folks want to unmute themselves and join in, they are welcome to. If you want to stay muted, also, I fully understand.
So again, the question of R, that's the first question you ask yourself, right? Beyond the first things that whenever you're looking at a language or a dialect of a people, you have to first, before you dive into sounds even, ask yourself, what are your stereotypical impressions of this dialect? And you have to confront your own unconscious or conscious biases about it, right? British accents to me always sound intelligent. You could be the stupidest person in Britain, as you have a British accent, I'm going to give you an intelligence that you may not have earned. So that's my own particular feelings about it. Maybe other people have different, right? If I hear a Southern accent, same thing. What are our unconscious biases immediately? Because you have to be honest with yourself as a person who's going to then try to embody that accent. Your bias, your stereotype might creep into your portrayal of the sound, and that's doing the sound an injustice, okay? So you just have to confront that first. So once we've confronted that, and then you ask yourself your character questions and all of that. The sounds of a British dialect, if we do RP in a minute, you ask yourself the question of R. What do they do with their R sound? The consonant R, by consonant I mean it's in front of a vowel or it starts the word. So like red, robin, right? Right. Their consonant R is exactly the same as we do. So there's nothing to change there, okay? Try not to be overly excited about changing things in the way that you sound, because a lot of things actually just might sound exactly the same as you, and that's okay. So the R in the consonant position stays exactly the same. The vowel of R, and a vowel of R is a term we use for R's that occur, or R sounds, I should say, that occur at the end of a word or in front of a consonant. So if an R sound is at the end of a word, like in the word there, it's a vowel. Now, everybody say there like a California San Jose person, right? There, and pay attention to what your tongue does, how it moves around in your mouth. There.
There.
There. There. What does your tongue do? Carol, what does your tongue do?
There. It kind of hangs out. There.
There. Yeah. What does it do? Does the front of it flip up or does it flip down? Does it scrunch up in the middle? Does your tongue go like this? Or does it go?
On the R sound, it scrunches.
It scrunches like that, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's R sometimes is different. There, say for me, car.
Car.
R.
Yeah, car. It pulls back a little bit like that. Car. Does yours do that? Pulls back. That's called a retroflex R. That's what our R's do in an American dialect. Our tongue started flat and then it pulled back a little bit. Somebody mentioned a French or Hungarian dialect. The R in a French or Hungarian dialect, I can't do it because my hand has a joint there, but it scrunches back in the back here. I have to do some breakdancing in order to, but it's back here, right? So the American retroflex R is the front of our tongue and it's pulling back a little bit, right? That tension, there's a tension in it. So a British R, vowel of R, they keep their tongue perfectly relaxed behind their bottom teeth. There,
There.
there, just keep it relaxed. There,
There.
yeah. Car,
Car.
good.
Car.
Your,
Yo.
Yeah.
yeah. So the vowels of R in a British dialect are just relaxed with your tongue staying behind your bottom teeth in a relaxed position. And it's true even when that R sound is in front of a consonant. So like in the word word, right? Word. You keep your tongue relaxed. You keep your tongue relaxed, and then it goes up to make the D sound. Word.
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 Okay.
Word. Now, obviously, there's other things that go along, but we're just asking ourselves the question. We're giving ourselves a place to start. Yeah. There's other things. There's things like what we call the oral posture, right? Californians, our accent in California is very, the prosody of it has its own like energy. We have like this up down thing we do where we have, right? That's a music that happens. It's not all bad to have an upward inflection, that question inflection, as long as you answer it in the sentence afterwards, right? So that everybody's like anxiety about up inflections. Don't take up inflections away from yourself. Just answer the frickin' question in the next sentence. Otherwise, you do sound like you're constantly questioning everything. At any rate, California accent is a very smiley sound, right? We live in this amazing place and it's like super sunny all the time and it's like gorgeous and there's a beach and it's like super chill. That's the American sort of like California coastal sound. I didn't know this until I was teaching the dialect workshop this summer, but apparently in the middle of California where all of the agriculture is, there's a full-on farm sound happening. There's a full-on adopted sort of, you know, they're doing a little bit of, you know, that sort of get over here. There's a little twang, there's a little Southern thing happening. And it's because apparently during the Dust Bowl, a lot of people from Oklahoma and the agrarian communities in the middle of America and the South emigrated out and located themselves in the California Central Valley. Who knew? I've never had to coach a California accent. I just speak one, right? So the idea of a California sound being so smiley and flat, our oral posture, the way we hold our mouth even when we're at rest is flatter. And so every vowel sound we say, every sort of thing that we're gonna, as we're doing it, it's gonna come out of a mouth that has this specific oral posture. For a British oral posture, what we're looking at is much more, not as, again, it's not a comedy routine, but there's a part of me that wants to make it so. But there's a little bit of like, there's a roundness, all right? So first of all, in British accent, the vowels are very, very rounded. And the sound comes a bit more forward in your face. There's a bit more nasality to it, right? And there's a relaxation of the jaw. They're not so desperate to please people as Americans. Right? And so there's a little bit of, you know, there's much more, you know, containment, if you were to call it that, right? You just sort of lock your mouth a bit more closed, a bit more rounded. And rather than thinking about everything as a smile, as if you have to sort of, you know, engage the world with this very overly fake positivity, go ahead and frown if the moment suits you, but bring the corners of your lips towards each other at rest. Even when you are at rest, bring the corners of your lips towards each other. And that's going to be the sort of oral posture that you start with when you're doing a British accent. So then you put those two things together and you say words like there, and you've got a very closed mouth, and you've got corners of your lips towards each other, and the tongue is relaxed. Now you start to, now you start to hear it in the nose. Yeah.
There.
There.
Car.
Car.
Oh.
Yes. Before.
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 So then after that, I listen to British sounds, and there's, little moments, little rules and stuff, but this is the 1 minute version that I've taken 10 minutes to explain, but this is the 1 minute version. And you look at really key sounds. So one of those key sounds in a British accent is the O. They glide into their O sound in a different way than we do. We do, if we're surfing, we're like, oh, righteous, right? We have that sort of, oh, no. And there's a glide into our California, oh, but we're saying it with a smile. There's an O that gets that glide, but there's no smile about it at all. It's very round. Keep your lips rounded. And you're going to say an sound like in the word the. You're going to say nice. And you're going to finish it into the O. You're going to go oh.
Oh.
Start with like the. Oh. Now, because we're really doing the version, that's going to make it more RP, sort of general oh no, right? But if you keep your mouth tight and sort of smile, you're going to go like EH. You're going to go oh. And that's the Queen's version of it. That's super posh.
Yeah.
Charles, no, don't do that.
No, darling.
No, Charles, you want it a bit more relaxed. No, don't go.
No, Charles.
Yeah, exactly. No, Charles. Meryl's cracking up over here. And yes, the musicality is different. That's the prosody of dialect. Yeah, you're going to want to hear how the inflections vary, how things move through in the way that the music plays through. But O is one of those key sounds in a British dialect. What's other ones? I mean, again, this is like the quick and easy. Those two things, just start with those two things. There's a whole lot more to add to the list, but if we were to do an entire dialect session, it would take us a lot longer than this. But those are good places to start with a British dialect. Ask the question of R and find at least one key sound that you know will lock you into that British sound, and that glide into the O is one of those key ones.
Try to speak with an accent for the rest of the night.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm gonna walk around my house just the.
Why not?
Yeah. This is really fun. Thanks, Kim, for joining us on the next stage.
Pleasure.
And thanks to everyone who has donated to the next stage. As you guys know, this program is completely free. And it's because of those who donate that we can keep it going. So many thanks to those people who did that. If you want to donate to City Lights or specifically the next stage, cltc.org/donate is where you can do all of that. And next week on the next stage, we have singer-songwriter Amy D, and that's going to be a live stream on Facebook, so you can check that out next Friday. And also this Sunday, our Shop with Love fundraiser begins on cltc.org/gala, so you can start bidding on auction items. And last but not least, stay safe, everyone. It is weird times right now, and we hope that everyone in our City Lights family and extended is safe and healthy and doing what they can.
Yes.
And thanks again to Kim for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks, everyone. This was great.
Thanks, Beverly.
See-
Thanks, Lisa.
See you next week.
Yeah, awesome.